Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the LGBTQ Institute Business Forum. Today's episode is specifically looking at creating intentional impact and equity for transgender and gender nonconforming employees. Thank you so much for joining us. We have some excellent panelists here today that's going to share some information for you all that I know a lot of folks have been asking for as we start to look at issues around the evolution of gender and diversity in the workplace. I first want to thank our platinum sponsors for making this series possible. It's great that we have panelists from each of these representative sponsors, Delta, BlackRock, Bank of America, on today. Thank you so much. I want to first introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Erica Saramenta, Director of US and Canada DEI Client Engagement for BlackRock. Erica, thank you for joining. We also have Ashton Reynolds, President of Equal Business Resource Group for Delta Airlines. There's a couple other things that you do as well that I'm sure we'll get into, Minister, as well. So thank you for joining us, Ashton. And of course, we have Tricia Russell, VP Life Event Services Consultant, Global Human Resources for Bank of America. Thank you all for being here today. Wanted to touch base and first begin by just having you all, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about yourselves and the work that you do within your respective organizations.
Gotcha.
Erica, would you like to start?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be on a panel. Too bad we're not live. One of these days we'll be back getting more live. I know down in Atlanta it's a little tough right now, but yeah, I've been at my company at BlackRock now coming up on 24 years, and the short story is came out in end of 2016, early 2017 as transgender. Now, for those of you who don't know, obviously financial services is a bit maybe behind the scenes of coming forth with being just an overall driver of diversity, equity, inclusion, right? When you look at it that way. And I can remember back when I first started thinking like, wow, this will never happen. And sure enough, as society began to change a little bit and our firm also was evolving at the time in 2016, it was the right moment to come out and basically come to work as my true self. So that being said, it's been a journey. We've both learned things along the way, both myself, our company. We've grown. It's been a great relationship for me to be here at BlackRock. And that being said, about 6 months ago, there was an opportunity that happened to also grow, which was part of being diversity, equity, inclusion. So in my current role, what I'm doing now is Director of Client Engagement for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. I'm basically talking to our external clients, both on, for most to US and Canada, a lot about what we're doing, all the initiatives in here. I think what's fascinating about this is like when you really find a role that marries your skill sets, your passion, and your drive and what you could bring to the table from experiences, that's like a win-win. And it's something really I started doing about a year and a half ago. Basically, I wrote a presentation about growing wealth in the LGBT community. Kind of got me some recognition. And they said, wow, there's a lot more facets to this. So let's take it a little bit broader. And now we're being able to engage on all the different things we do at the heart of DEI. So really excited to be doing that now and full time for going on my 4th month, believe it or not. So new career starts, never know where your career is going to take you.
Erica, thank you so much for sharing that. What a journey. Tricia, do you want to go next?
Sure. Can you all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I am blessed and honored to represent Bank of America here as a Bank of America employee. In following up on a comment that Erica made, I would say, Bank of America obviously is a financial institution, and the blessed part is many faceted, but including the Bank of America has been a very progressive company for a very long time in terms of supporting diversity and more importantly, striving unceasingly to build deeper inclusion within our workplace. I transitioned at Bank of America enroll back in 2013. I am transgender as well. And I was blown away by the support I received across the company and in so many ways, and we'll talk a little bit about those. I am in our Global Human Resources division in a department called Life Event Services, and we provide a lot of support in a variety of ways for our employees and their families, whether it be relating to an upcoming retirement, long-term illness, a variety of military services, support services that we provide, natural disasters, domestic abuse, COVID support, and very importantly, going back a number of years, we developed a Tgnc support group within Life Event Services. So just to, I don't like to talk about age much, but to date myself, I'm coming up on 65. I'm getting all of those Medicare, you got to make all that kind of stuff. And it blows my mind. And yet I transitioned in 2013. I was one of those stubborn ones that just knew there was A, something wrong with me, B, my life would end if anybody ever knew it. And I stubbornly, tried to portray someone else, the box that I thought I was supposed to fit into my mid-50s. So back when I was a kid growing up, and my parents, my very, very Catholic parents, first came to the realization that I was stuck on this phase of thinking I was a girl, wanting to dress like a girl, hang out with girlfriends. And, they made it very clear there was something deeply wrong with me. So, that's one of those sad things that motivated me to hide for decades. And one of the reasons that I'm as active as I am within our company and in our community, in terms of education and advocacy, hoping that maybe even in my lifetime, we'll arrive at a place where parents just get it and they support their kids being who they are and being proud of it at a very early age, instead of arriving middle age as I did, with a family, doing all the things thought I was supposed to do, and it all blows up. And there's a lot of people devastated in the process. So that's one of the reasons that I'm involved so actively in diversity and inclusion work. Lots more I can share, as we go forward. I'll just stop there.
Tricia, thank you for all of your background and sharing that and being vulnerable with us. It means a lot. I think it's going to add to the depth of the conversation. Ashton?
Well, hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for having me. My name is Ashton Reynolds, and I'm the president of Delta's LGBTQ business resource group called Equal. I've been with Delta for almost 7 years. I'm a flight attendant. And, outside of Delta, I am very heavily involved in supporting the LGBTQ community, especially here in Atlanta. I'm a minister. I am a nonprofit worker. I've been involved with multiple nonprofits here in the city. And through my work on the ground, I've just really grown incredibly passionate about supporting our trans brothers, sisters, and siblings, and our gender nonconforming siblings, because a lot of times when we think about the LGBTQ community, we often forget that there is a T in that acronym. And while it's great that there are so many trans folks that are out there, doing the work to make their lives better, I think it's also important that they have allies within the LGBTQ community. And so when the opportunity came around for me to get involved with equal at Delta. One of the very first things that I mentioned in my interview for the position and my very first meeting with my officers was that I wanted to make sure that we stood up for our TGNC colleagues. And Delta, as always, has been incredibly responsive and incredibly supportive in our efforts to just hear from the experiences of our TGNC colleagues and to find some very reasonable solutions to make sure that when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, that also includes our TGNC colleagues and customers. You know, Delta's for nearly 90 years, Delta has been in the business of connecting people around the world, and connecting people around the world. We have to make sure that we're connecting all people around the world, and that includes our TGNC family members, community members, and customers. And so I'm really excited to be part of this panel. I hope to learn as much as I share. And again, thank you all so much for this opportunity.
Ashton, thank you for that. And thank you again to all of you for being willing to be vulnerable. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's going to help us dig a little bit deeper, I think, beyond just some of the panels that people have probably heard before. And I do want to give the folks out there a sense of what it's like to be transgender in the South. And I know that for all of us here, none of these stats are going to be new to us. But again, some of the folks who are watching now, but may watch later, might be new to hearing some of this data. But what we know is that according to the LGBTQ Institute Southern Survey, transgender Southerners are 3 times more likely to have been denied a job and twice as likely to have been physically harassed or harassed verbally or in writing. They're twice as likely to stay in jobs that they would prefer to leave or have left because of discrimination, and are less likely to seek promotions or talk about topics or participate in social activities with coworkers. That's just kind of a level set of what trans folks, gender nonconforming folks are telling us that they've experienced, especially here in the South, in the workforce. I would love to dive a little bit into, and in a broad way, if you all could share one initiative that you're most proud of or excited about that your company is undertaking to ensure that TGNC employees feel welcome and that they belong.
I'll jump in. Okay,
go
go
ahead, Ashton.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Trisha.
Okay, so I am thankful to work for a company where there are so many initiatives going on, but just to pick one, that we're really working hard on currently, and it's an evolving effort, has to do with pronouns and preferred name. It was not too long ago that people like me, and I could talk about the reasons why I have not changed any of my legal documentation. Let's talk about fun at the airport and things like that. But my legal name is Patrick. The world knows me as Trisha, unless I have to sign a legal document or anything related to HR. And so in all of our various systems, including our corporate directory, for so long I showed up as Patrick Russell. So our directory, our systems outed me as transgender, before I had anything to say about it, when that would happen, how that would happen. We called it our preferred name initiative, where we have now enabled all of our employees, and that's not just transgender people who are in a similar situation to me, but anyone that identifies deeply with a name other than their name given at birth, to go into one place, workplace, which is our HR system. And there is a module in there that allows them to enter preferred name, pronouns. We're evolving our corporate directory and other systems to display pronouns. so that for those who wish to, they can announce ahead of their arrival to a meeting or whatever it might be, hey, this is who I am. See me as I see me, please. So a lot of efforts to enable people to show up the way they want to show up in every form of communication within our company.
Yeah, and exactly to what Trisha was just talking about, Delta has really taken some significant strides in making sure that people understand, so let me back up. A lot of people don't know what they don't know, right? And so in having conversations with our trans colleagues and trans employees at Delta, I personally learned a great deal about how important name changes are and proper pronoun recognition is, and things like that. And in just the last couple months, Delta has done a significant amount of work to help make sure that even outside of like the legal HR related type things, that front facing names can be changed for transgender employees who want to engage with their colleagues, through email and through our social, intranets and things like that. We've had some very extensive conversations around like, what are some ways that we can make this a little bit easier? And with the understanding that with any large company, there are a lot of systems and a lot of processes and a lot of things that need to talk to each other. And Delta has been very committed to figuring out solutions despite all of these complications to make sure that when people show up, they can bring their true selves, they can bring their real names, they can express their gender identity without any confusion or discomfort. And so that's something that we are actively in the process of. And so I'm really excited to hear, Trisha, that you all have taken those steps, and it shows me kind of a pathway ahead, because a lot of the things that you just mentioned are things that we, as recently as last night, were in meetings discussing how we can make these things a lot more accessible to our Tgnc colleagues. And we have done a lot of work in terms of just how we talk about gender. So as a flight attendant, I make a lot of announcements, and formerly we would say, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. And I believe it was just last year, or maybe 2 years ago, we officially changed that to hello, everyone, so that we make sure that we're not, leaving anyone out, because not everyone's a lady, not everyone's a gentleman. You can take that how you want. But we wanted to make sure that, we are being very intentional about the words that we use, about the way we address our employees and our customers. And those little steps, even though they may seem insignificant, really go a long way with making sure that people feel included.
Yes, that's awesome, Ashton. And I want to let Erica jump in too, but I just wanted to tack on one little observation to what we were both talking about, and that is preferred name is an initiative that's easy to sell, because it benefits everyone. I'll just give one example. Living in the South, it's a very Southern thing for people to grow up using their middle name. I can't tell you how many people I know well in our company. One of my best buds that sits right next to me, his name is James Daniel Cox. He's always been Danny Cox, but in all of our systems, it was James Cox. Nobody knew who that, when James Cox joins WebEx, nobody knew who that was. So I've had so many non-LGBTQ plus employees reach out and say, I'm so glad you did that because people see me now. So some of these things are very easy to sell.
Well, I'll chime in here on the data front, because I think it's interesting. We've dealt with so many of these challenges, and I know all of us have dealt with the technical challenges, the legality issues that surround name changes and also systems, right? And I remember when I first came out, it was a little clunky. I also would chime in and say, yeah, it's great to see that now we can update that, put our pronouns on our web profile page, include them in our Outlook. I think one of the things I'm also excited about is the fact that what we're going to be doing next year around just a self-ID and the breakdown of those classifications, because this is really important on a couple of fronts, right? Not just to give the exposure to our employees and have the freedom to name themselves, but also to understand what our population is so that we can actually develop better programming, right? That's where we want to get to, right? And I think part of it with all these initiatives we do in DEI is how can we better help make that equitable experience grow for each of our underrepresented groups, right? What can we do there? So identifying is going to be one of those great ways. I would also be remiss too if I didn't mention the fact that, yeah, I got great support when it came out, but I would also have to express what our firm has done vocally by signing legislation against some of these bills out there, or just supporting, joining the HRC, the Business Coalition, all these types of legislation to, push down these anti-bills that we see so many. And I know the number varies between 200 and 250 year to date, but yeah, there's a lot more out there than there ever has been. So to have a top-down support from your firm really does mean something too, and it shows that it's in our best, we're being thought about in the best interest.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on that particular piece. And we have gotten a response in the chat from Sam, who was mentioning that first, thank you for having gender neutral terms. But what are the options that we can encourage folks to use instead of sir or ma'am?
That's a really great question, because personally, as a flight attendant, I don't use either. I just make eye contact and ask, would you like something to drink? What would you like? Are you dining with us today? I think, our language kind of forces us into these formalities that are rooted in these gender binaries, but it doesn't mean that we have to use them. And it doesn't mean that if we don't use them, that we're not being courteous or kind or welcoming. One of the things that we talk about as flight attendants is a smile goes a long way. We don't get to see the smiles as much because of our mask mandates, but you can still see it through the person's eyes. And so I think, it may be a little awkward for some folks at first, but literally, if you just look at someone and say, hello, how are you today? Would you like something to drink? That doesn't necessarily, that was kind, that was courteous, that doesn't, that's not casual. And it really helps to affirm whoever that person is, because really their gender doesn't matter. We're just asking them if they want something to drink, or making sure that their experience is nice or comfortable.
So true.
I was going to say, I guess knowing, what their pronouns are. I mean, look, I have some friends in the business that identifies, gender neutral, non-binary, and, they like to have the pronunciation or title as mix, MX or MIR, MIR. I think it's almost, in some cases you do have to ask, unless it's, what are your preferred pronouns, and then how can I address you going forward with the title? I know, the easiest thing now is just to say, folks or colleagues. I mean, I got that actually question from one of our other countries, because in their email responses, they were typically sending out ladies and gentlemen. Now it's just dear colleagues, simply put, dear colleagues.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well that, one of the benefits of all the work that we have been doing with regard to preferred names and the ability to display pronouns in a variety of ways. We also do a couple of other things that help with this. First of all, if you know someone's name, it's easy enough to use their name. But we have I'll call it a movement that's gaining steam, where most of us, even if we're in the office, you're interacting with people who are all over the world on any given conference call. People are all over. So most of our interaction is virtual, even if everyone is in the office. So we start meetings with the meeting facilitator, identifying themselves, sharing their pronouns, and very quickly, anything else that they want to others to know about them that would help them address them as they wish to be addressed. So, those are some things that help too.
I appreciate that, and thank you, Sam, for the question. And I just want to remind everyone that's on the call that you certainly can use the chat function, or you can use the raise hand emoji at the bottom and ask your question there. But I want to go a little bit higher level, and again, forgive me for going a little long here in terms of leading some explanation around Bostock, but I think it really is going to help set up the next discussion part that we have. And in our last episode, we delved into how the Supreme Court ruling that took place on June 15th, 2020, where Bostock versus Clayton County, where they issued their landmark 6-3 decision affirming that prohibition of sex discrimination in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 extends to discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The Supreme Court held that an employer who fires an individual merely for being gay or transgender violates Title VII, and that it is impossible to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating against that individual based on sex. So knowing this and digging a little bit deeper into some of these efforts that we've been chatting about, I first want to start with just basic overall trans-inclusive policies. Some of those will include pronouns, but one of the things we found from our Southern survey is that in particular, transgender employees really didn't feel that their company upheld their policy. And as someone who's worked in policy, you can have the best policy in the world. But unless it's upheld, unless people understand and they have training, it can sometimes fall apart a little bit. And so I wanted to dig deep into your policies at your companies and what are some key elements of that you think are really working well, and then things that still need to be worked on as people are learning and growing.
Well, I'll jump in. It's Trisha, and share a couple of things in that area. As you rightly point out, there is policy and then there is practice. And I applaud our company, like so many others, for continually updating policies as we learn more about not just TGNC, but more broadly LGBTQ and other minorities, et cetera. Our policies, without going into all the detail, keeping it high level, we involve so many people in the process, stated timeframes for review, comprehensive review of every section of our non-discrimination policies, so that we hear anything, and there's a very formalized process with regular calendaring, to address it and expand, the policy as situations warrant. In terms of practice, though, you're right. Just because you have a policy in place doesn't mean that, to use Bank of America as an example, all 210,000 employees share the same philosophy as the company does. And how do you move people along? And that's where education is so very important. And we have, a variety, not just of LGBTQ+, but a lot of other, training opportunities, some of them required training opportunities that, move people along the path of understanding someone's journey that's different than your own, in all the myriad ways that we can come to the workplace with different experiences, different journeys. And it's, deriving to understand those who are different than you that builds inclusion. And so, we are very, very purposeful about that. And again, continuing to enhance our internal trainings. And, as an example of that, we started Transgender 101 training, let's call it that, a few years ago. And people started coming along. But, then, there's the realization, okay, you start somewhere, but let's talk about the life journey of someone that's gender nonconforming in a variety of different ways that presents. So I think education is so important.
Yeah, the education factor, I mean, when I think about when I first came out, I mean, our firm is 18,000 plus employees, so relatively smaller in context to Bank of America. And at the time, it was probably maybe 15, 16,000. And I think it's not that we didn't have policies or even healthcare in place; it just wasn't explored. No one had gone through these procedures before, right? So I got to go through and experience those procedures, and I think that was a learning experience along the way, which helped us, shape future policies as well. With regard to overall policy, and we could cite handbooks, quotes and all that great stuff, but I think probably one of the most inclusive things is especially wherever you go in an office at BlackRock, regardless of the 46 plus countries we're in, it's a safe zone. You are free to be who you are. And in some of those countries, it's not socially acceptable whatsoever to do that. So I think that's what, it's amazing how our Out and Allies network has grown, dramatically over the past 4 years. But to have, folks, especially in India, feel comfortable in a workplace to come out, it's really great to see that. And then that to me is that safe haven of inclusivity that it's hard to breed all over the industry. A lot of times you don't get that feeling. So that's just a little bit about that the overall arching policy.
And I think, from a business resource group perspective, I think that's why we are so important to businesses, because as both of you said, with companies so large, since you all touted your numbers, we have 75,000 employees, so we're right in the middle of the two of you. And we have folks from different regions. We have people in different divisions, and those divisions have different cultures based on the type of work that's being done, based on the type of industry speak that happens. And business resource groups help to permeate all of those spaces and really find out, okay, flight attendants may be good on trans issues, but what about some other divisions where they may not have any sort of exposure or education? What if there's someone that's out on the ramp that is transitioning? What is that experience like? And for that one employee, that may be isolating. But if you have a business resource group that can help to navigate you through whatever those policies are, and back you up with whatever your experiences are within your particular region, within your particular division, and help to amplify whatever the initiative is company-wide, so that it doesn't become just something that we fix for this one employee in this one city in this one department. But if we recognize that this is something that maybe Delta hasn't looked at or hasn't tackled, the business resource groups have the ability to really pull all of the different people into the room and say, okay, this is something that we've recognized is a gap in our policy, or this is a gap in the way that we operate. And if we are to continue to be committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we got to look at this. And I'm really excited about the fact that I'm among, Equal is among 9 other business resource groups that work really around the clock to make sure that not just for our LGBT colleagues, but our Black colleagues, Asian American colleagues, our women, and so on and so on and so on, are really being included in policymaking, in decision making, and in how we shape our culture and our future.
That's a great point. And I know it's talking about employee resource groups. I think back 3 years ago when our Out and Allies partnered with our families at BlackRock. Okay, so you have your Out and Allies network and you have your traditional families. But what we did is a firm-wide survey to find out where we could enhance medical benefits. And that was really, it was a great project because what came out of it were increases for adoption, surrogacy, in vitro fertilization, which benefited mutually both parties, right? It wasn't just about the LGBTQ community, but it was something that we did together in concert that really helped across all employees who were able to take advantage of those, greatly enhanced resources. So when you look at it that way, it's amazing how much your employee resource, and we have like 15 different employee resource groups here, but how much they shape the culture of your firm. And also, I might add too, I think it's, for those out there who are listening, I mean, if you're not involved in yours, you need to do so, not just to push policy or make changes, but also it's an excellent network and exposure opportunity. I mean, if you look at it that way, I could look across our firm and I see so many other folks who've, cheered or done something. Actually, promotion just came out today, and one of our LGBTQ former leaders, she made MD. It was great to see that, but she put her hard work and time in and did the efforts in helping to drive the agenda through the network. So I think those are great opportunities for those of you who have those networks out there to really get involved, and not just in one. I'm a member of a number of them, so it's great to see the involvement.
Yeah, and to that last point, you don't necessarily have to be a part of the community to join the resource group. So if there is, and I always say this to my fellow colleagues, if there is a certain group of people that you don't have a lot of education around, join the business resource group, because that's an opportunity for you to learn and for you to hear directly from the people who are impacted, what their experiences are. So I want to echo, if you are in a company that has employee resource groups or business resource groups or affinity groups, definitely do whatever you can to join, because they are incredibly beneficial.
It's interesting.
Follow up on that, if you don't mind. Bank of America, very much like, those two examples, strongly encourages participation in at least one employee resource group, not required, but we stress that our employee networks are a very important source of leadership training.
Mm-hmm.
And those who have held leadership positions in employee resource groups, there can be a leg up in promotion opportunities. And, we leverage the employee resource groups as a company as, subject matter experts in so many ways, new product development and introduction, where, you don't know what you don't know, as someone said earlier, and we want to reflect, the diversity of the communities that we serve in our product offerings and services. So the employee resource groups are very, very productive that way too.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that's been something that I've been able to witness over the years, is employee resource groups really being historically thought of as a group that is very kind of insular, that provides support to those employees who join that group. And we're starting to see a shift, as you mentioned, Tricia, that businesses are starting to understand that these are in-house think tanks. These are in-house business strategist groups, to your point, that can be very helpful in terms of branding, content, products. I think it's something to be noted. I will say that we did find in our survey that over half reported not having an employee resource group. And so I guess my question is that, what would be some of your advice for folks who are experiencing this or in a smaller company who don't have an employee resource group? What are your thoughts for them?
I mean, look, I've watched a number of our groups form over the past few years. Our, Black professionals or Asian network. Some of our networks have been around longer. Our Women's Initiative, 16 years, our Out and Allies, 14 years. But in some cases, it was a matter of some of the employees getting together, engaging a senior leader, and then ultimately raising the awareness, like why we need to have this initiative. It's not just like, hey, me too, I want to form a group, but to raise awareness and train other employees. I think at that point they get it. There's an importance behind it because, as you said, that think tank, we do, I'm sure all the firms do employee opinion surveys, but the other venue is to actually hold intimate conversations with leaders of these organizations to validate and test the atmosphere of the firm of how they see culture and experience moving. Is it the same? The perception of one community may be different than what the firm thinks that community, really is experiencing. So I think it's important to have them. So when you bring it to that level, usually the buy-in is there, the need is there. I mean, we look back at 2020 with all the social injustice. I can't imagine no one would say no. I think it's a matter of just making the initiative to go out and engage a senior leader and have the sponsorship there.
Yeah, I'll just ditto that. The quickest path, the most effective path, and really the only one that will result in, a lot of impact is executive level sponsorship. So you start there, you do education with your executive level leaders to the extent that it's needed, to the point that the need for that resource group becomes obvious, and they are on board and they will help you make it happen. You've got to have the senior level support though.
And in some cases to that, okay, if you're a junior employee, what do you do first? You go engage that. Well, maybe you could find some other colleagues around the firm who are like you,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Get the consensus, get the buy-in, and then have them, like we have executive sponsors. We have business sponsors in our network that funnel up to our GEC, Global Executive Committee members, and there's 23 within BlackRock, but one of those, two of those folks sponsor our network. Mark McComb and Sandy Boss, they sponsor our network. And, we don't run up and funnel everything to them. So we have people that will do that. And that's the way to get started. I mean, a lot of these things happen with grassroots. I remember talking about this at some of the conferences we've all attended, ways to help formulate your networks though. And you got to be vocal though.
Yeah, and really quickly, just making sure that you have your finger on the pulse of the industry, and of some of your maybe your competitors, have an understanding of how these groups, adding these groups will be beneficial to the overall success of your company, what these groups will mean for the customers. So think beyond, well, I want to have a place where I feel included, but also while creating that space, this is why this will be beneficial to the business overall.
Exactly, and putting into that business case argument, I think, is going to help as well.
Yeah.
And Erica, to your point, and Tricia, the idea of making sure that it's you're going to the top where things can actually move quicker and get done. But Eric, I liked your point about, especially for those who are smaller companies, what can be done. I think getting that consensus is going to be really important. And that kind of goes back to the conversation on allies. And what has been your experience in how much further you can get faster with allies, and what has been some of the learnings that you've all experienced when trying to work with allies on some of these issues internally?
So I'll jump in on that one. So we just did a survey for our equal members, just to find out, what are the things that they need? How can we better be supportive as a business resource group? And we found out that a lot of equal members are allies. A lot of them maybe have children who are part of the LGBTQ community, or who are just, supportive of the LGBTQ community. And a lot of them just really wanted to know more and learn more. And so what we've done is really, we put out inclusive language handbook. We put out just on Spirit Day, we put out some ally tips. So in all of our break rooms, we had different tips that were kind of scrolling on the screens, helping people understand, like, these are some things that you can do to become a better ally. And we have learned that through allies, our message really expands. We have folks who are part of the LGBTQ community who they may feel 100% comfortable in their workspace, and they may not necessarily need a certain level of support, but there are other spaces and other, like I mentioned earlier, there are other departments where allyship really goes a long way for that one employee that may be part of the community that doesn't necessarily have anyone else to talk to. And so we've really been working to leverage allyship, and understanding that, especially when we're talking about executive level influence and leadership, some of those people may not necessarily be part of the community. And so they are also allies. And so we have really put a lot of effort into putting out this message that this business resource group is not just for LGBTQ employees, but it's also for our allies too, because that's where we can really start to shift the culture of the company.
Yeah, and to that point, it's not just true in this space. It has always been through history that it's the combination of those who may be quote unquote different are willing to be visible, to share their journeys, to be vulnerable. But it's the allies who they bring along, who support them, who drive change. And so we have formalized what we call our Bank of America Ally Program. We have a website that enables, with all kinds of resources, and that enables people to go in and register as an ally. We have various stuff that they can put on their desk, that shows that they're an ally. On the website, the Ally website, you can go and pull up any address, any office building globally and see who the registered allies are. And we've got tens of thousands of them. And literally people who are, looking for new career opportunities internally, they'll often go to our ally site just to kind of check out the team, that they're looking to, get hired into, to see what the climate is, in terms of inclusiveness. So allyship is so important. Anything you can do to formalize, an ally program, and ours is sponsored by an executive level, co-sponsored by two executive level, senior leaders.
I think about how we came about to our name, and it was 5 years ago. We actually changed it from the Out Network to Out and Allies. That was the most simplest thing to do, right?
Amen.
And it was an initiative to bring more allies in. I mean, and since then we've more than doubled the amount of folks that feel engaged, because I think at first it was just like, well, I don't know, what do I talk about if I go there? I'm not part of the community. Mm-hmm. Right. But then, as you found out, as you said, along the way, and I know I've engaged these conversations with folks who have transgender children, now they have some that, and the connectivity builds, or have a brother, a sister, a relative, the stories. So the allies then began to formulate. The second thing we did this year, which was quite interesting, is our global executive sponsor held a call, and it was a global call because we had our members from across Hong Kong and EMEA too. But a conversation on intersectional allyship. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So we're bringing it front and center to really give you a perspective, like it's not just out and allies, but there's also variable aspects of the intersectionality among this group too. It is really
yeah, I'll add this little tidbit. Our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council is chaired by our CEO, Brian Moynihan, and he chairs every meeting. If he can't make a meeting, it is rescheduled so that he can participate and lead the meeting. So, we're in the enviable position of, from the very top, this guy, eats, sleeps, dreams inclusion. So very powerful.
That can be, like you said, very powerful. And I think that, when we talk about kind of digging into one of your points about how folks internally will look to the Ally page to see where they might want to go, and if it's really inclusive, if people are understanding issues that might be of concern to them. I think it also goes back to people looking for jobs. A lot of folks are going to companies' websites to understand what kind of initiatives they have specifically around transgender and gender nonconforming. And so this work, I definitely think, to the business case, puts you all a step ahead in terms of doing this work. I did have a question though. And I think this is something that I've certainly experienced when running these types of groups, is you do have a group of folks who want trans and gender nonconforming, non-binary specific moments and times to be together, have community. In addition, yes, there's allyship, but how do you balance that with folks who are coming in? They might have, a trans daughter, and they are wanting to get information about that, while you also have TGNC employees who are wanting to gather to talk about specific work-related issues or issues that they in particular want to talk about in a safe space. How do you balance the allyship with the community who's wanting to come to talk about that specific issue?
At Bank of America, it's not an employee resource group, but we have an internal TGNC community that there is information about, that is readily out there and visible. And there are a variety of ways to join that community with, boundaries. So, permissions, and, anyone who is TGNC or has a family member that is TGNC, however they define that. We have regular events. We have a forum, that people can converse on. And, in that, it's an informal, formalized, community, but all kinds of things bubble up within there. And people talk about anything and everything under the sun. My son, I've come to learn, is transgender, or my daughter is, such and such. And, I'm struggling to, anything under the sun. So that's, like I say, an informal but formalized community that enables that kind of unstructured dialogue and interaction. And that's very helpful.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go.
So we are literally having that conversation within Equal as recently as yesterday, because that's something that in our conversations with some of our trans employees, we realized that this is a gap, that we have the Equal group, which is kind of all encompassing of folks across the LGBTQ spectrum and allies. However, groups of people who are especially marginalized really need their own space to be able to speak comfortably, speak freely, and come up with solutions on their own. And so what we are doing is we're building a TGNC coalition of folks. We have already a trans advocacy committee, which provides education and resources and things like that. But what we're doing is we're really gathering all of our TGNC employees and putting together a coalition, putting them, we're utilizing our technology to create a space for them to chat, to connect, to share resources, to ask questions. without fear of exposure, because there are still some trans employees who may not necessarily feel comfortable with being out at work, not just at Delta, but everywhere. And so we want to make sure that they too have a space to be able to access the resources that Delta has for them. So we're putting together this coalition literally right now. So I'm really excited about, this is kind of one of the biggest things that we've done at Equal since I've been president. So I'm really excited to see where this goes. And I'm excited, again, Trisha, thank you for helping me see that there is a pathway forward to making sure that, all of our employees really have a space where they can feel heard and seen and included.
And I'll even throw this out there. In the last 4 or 5 years, to support this community, we've recognized a couple things. First of all, as it relates to career development, very often you don't know it's possible for you to do X until you see someone like you who's at a senior level in the organization and doing well. So we've focused a lot on that, including development of a Tgnc leadership and sponsorship program that identifies high-performing Tgnc employees at any level of the organization and connects them with senior level leaders, to help provide the tools for people to grow in their career, to move up and succeed, from the Tgnc community.
And Ryan, I would just, chime in again, being a much smaller organization, those intimate moments with the community, we've done fireside chats by way of invite through those recognizing who we need to bring it on to. Also in concert, with our DEI department, which now I'm part of, because I was participating in those events myself, to kind of voice the sentiment as well. Very small forums.
I love that. And Eric, I'm going to start with you on our final question, because we are running out of time. I could chat for hours, but any final words of advice that you would give to folks who are looking to ensure that their company is intentional about creating equity for Tgnc employees?
Yeah, first off, your actions are going to speak for themselves, right? I think that's key. And then having that awareness and bringing it out in front and center. So I look at some of the actions we're taking, and I've never been in this industry now coming up on 25 years, and I never in this time have I seen such a proactiveness to try to raise awareness around many topics, right? And this is included, and be part of the voice. For us, it's been relaunching our program last year. We actually came out with a formal relaunch to bring awareness to Out and Allies overall. And to that point, with the sponsorship, developing a really nuanced mentoring program for our programs, and even offering now sponsorship programs too for some of our employees. So I think that has to be, you have to be front and center. For me, I think it's also the strong emphasis on the allyship, because they're their voice when you're not in a room. It's analogous to sponsorship, right? When an employee goes for promotion, recommendation, whatever it may be, there's someone who's the sponsor who's nodding and saying yes, they deserve it. But it's also on the flip side for us as part of the LGBTQ community to have that strong proactive allyship speak up for us when we're not in the room for variable reasons, right? And I think driving that home is really important.
And I'll toss out just a very simple one in concept, but very, very powerful, particularly the larger the organization is. All of our senior leaders have what they call quarterly all hands meetings, and they have multiple levels, every level of their organization. And we have established, that every one of those all hands meetings has an inclusion component of some kind. And it's an opportunity for that leader to ensure that the right kind of conversation is happening and to demonstrate their support for it. So that's a good one.
I think, for me, as someone who is not part of the Tgnc community, I consider myself an ally in this respect. I think relationship building is incredibly important. Really find out who, again, those leaders, those sponsors, those folks who will speak on your behalf, or who will be in the room with you as you speak up on your own behalf. That really goes a long way in helping to drive the culture of the company. I'm happy to be that person in the room for some of our Tgnc colleagues. But for, again, as we've discussed, there are some folks that are in smaller companies or in smaller environments. Really build that coalition, build those relationships, help the people that you work with and around to understand why it's really important that you have the level of support that you require. And really, building those relationships will go a long way, because if someone is personally invested in you, they'll be willing to learn more, and they'll be willing to invest more in something that they probably never would have considered otherwise.
Thanks for being an ally, Ashton.
Of course, always.
Hey, Matt.
Yes. Well, and I just wanted to say thanks to all of you. I also know that our time is short, but I have to remind folks that, again, talking about TNGC folks, that we are bringing folks together. One of the ways we were able to have these conversations is by ensuring that we have a baseline level set of knowing where people might be. And we do that through our Southern survey. So if you haven't taken the Southern survey, I'm going to encourage you to all take that. You can see the link there. And I'm also going to remind folks that our next conversation, we've had a conversation today about employees, but our next session, we're going to go outside the company and talk about customers. And again, how we can respect and value the dignity of transgender and gender nonconforming, non-binary folks. So I wanted to just say thanks again to Trisha, Erica, Ashton. Thank you all for being willing to be here today, to be vulnerable, to share your story, and help us glean some of the insights that you've all been able to get over the years. So hopefully folks can start to feel that they have an equitable and safe place to work. Thank you again, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.